Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Christopher Robert Neal, Esquire, Scientific Illuminist. Wonderful Strange 36 at gmail.com. Sun 19 degrees Leo, 8 hours 36.3 minutes. Moon 15 degrees Taurus, 31 hours 27.9 minutes. Dies Martes, hour of Mars, 1:16 after Cairo, 11 August 2020, 3:51:23 GMT -5 at 410 East Washington Avenue, apartment 02, Madison, Wisconsin 53703, soon to be demolished. 3:34 Liber al Vel Legis, divined. But your holy place shall be untouched throughout the centuries. Though with fire and sword it be burnt down and shattered, yet an invisible house there standeth, and shall stand until the fall of the great equinox, when Harumachus shall arise and the double-wanded one assume my throne and place. Another prophet shall arise and bring fresh fever from the skies. Another prophet shall arise and bring fresh fever from the skies. Another prophet shall arise and bring fresh fever from the skies. Another woman shall awake the lust and worship of the snake. Another soul of God and beast shall mingle and globe it priest. Another king shall reign and bless and blessings no longer be poured to the hawk-headed mystical lord. August 2020, which equals 39, 4:02 a.m., Greenwich Mean Time -2. Mystery of Mystery, a primer of Thelemic Ecclesiastical Gnosticism, dedicated to the clergy of the EGC, ISBN 978-0-99053470-0-9. First printing 2014, Common Era. Second printing 2015, Common Era. Authors Sabazius, commonly pronounced Sabazius, 10 degree or X degree, USGL of OTO, and Tau Helena. Tau equals 400. Copyright 2014 Common Era, Ordo Templi Orientis, USA, Grand Secretary General, P.O. Box 2313, Maple Grove, Minnesota 55311, www.oto-usa.org. Design and production by Conjoined Creation, P.O. Box 1172, Berkeley, California 94701-1172. Preface. The Gnostic Mass is an incredibly deep, complex, multi-layered ceremony. It beckons our ancient primal identity with the generative powers of life, and it plays out a symphony of correspondences between history, symbolism, art, mysticism, and magic. Each celebration of the Gnostic Mass is an expression of eternity, piercing the veils of temporality, a showing forth of a timeless mystery in which we are all interwoven. It is not merely the Eucharistic sacrament of bread and wine, but the sacrament of existence itself, the expression of our Godhead entering into matter for the ecstatic fulfillment of its possibilities. The Gnostic Mass is an inexhaustible source of meaning and illumination. This is because the Mass itself represents the mysteries. These are not the secrets that are known by some and guarded from others, but the mystery of mystery itself. It represents, in a rich, dramatic form, that which is secret and ineffable, beyond speech and beyond sight, and beyond all term. The Gnostic Mass celebrates the most holy mystery. As the Master Therion says, since truth is superrational, it is incommunicable in the language of reason. Note 1. Postcards to Probationers from the Equinox, Volume 1, Number 2. And all real secrets are incommunicable. Note 2. Magic in Theory and Practice, Chapter 9. The Gnostic Mass therefore refers to a knowledge incommunicable, save by experience. Note 3. The Temple of Solomon the King, from the Equinox, Volume 1, Number 7. This knowledge attained through experience is what is meant by gnosis, the direct experiential knowledge that is not and cannot be communicated with words. It can only be hinted at through symbol and allegory, like fingers pointing to the moon. And this is one reason our church is the Gnostic Catholic Church. As the Master Therion says, you shall comprehend when, rising above reason, which is but a manipulation of the mind, you come to pure knowledge by direct perception of the truth. Note 4. Liber CL, or 150, De Lege Libellum. Since the nature of the mysteries is that they are, by definition, not inexhaustible or completely explainable through language, there is therefore a theoretically infinite amount about them that one can say or write. Nonetheless, one with wisdom and experience can give indications of certain avenues of understanding, symbolic explanations, Kabbalistic formulae, and mythological correspondences to aid and guide the aspirant in understanding and more fully participate in the Gnostic Mass. Grand Master Sabazius, or Sabazius, 10th degree, has done exactly this in Mystery of Mystery. Reading the previous editions of Mystery of Mystery greatly aided my own understanding and appreciation of this sacred rite, and I am deeply grateful and excited for this new edition. It is my sincere hope that readers will find this text insightful and illuminating, not only increasing knowledge, but provoking all of us to attain to a deeper and richer experience of the central sacramental rite of our order. Fraternally, Frater 131. Introduction to the second edition. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. This revised edition includes a number of minor corrections and updates, many of which have been documented in the revision list of my Invisible Basilica website. These include a fairly substantial number of revisions to the footnotes to the Gnostic Mass and various biographies of the EGC saints. One newly proclaimed saint, Giordano Bruno, has been added to the list. There have been a number of formatting changes as well, which will, hopefully, make the book easier to use for reference. Some of my lengthier notes have now been converted to separate essays: the Thelemic calendar, the collects, and gestures referring to parts of the body. A completely new section has been added to the book, Part 4, EGC in America, containing material on the implementation of the EGC system under the U.S. Grand Lodge of OTO, including some additional rituals and a book list for EGC priests and priestesses. 2 new items from the website have been included in the appendices: W.B. Crow's Manifesto of the Gnostic Catholic Church with my comments, and an interesting fragment of the Apophasis Magelli by the Gnostic saint Simon Magus. Finally, we are including a previously unpublished essay by Aleister Crowley on Sir Richard Francis Burton. Mystery of Mystery was first published as Red Flame No. 2 in 1995, Era Vulgaris, and reprinted in trade paperback format in 2005, Era Vulgaris. In 1995, I was still serving as Grand Secretary General of what was then known as Agape Lodge of OTO, and Sister Helena was serving as International Secretary General. The next year, I was made National Grand Master General of U.S. Grand Lodge and U.S. Primate of EGC. Since that time, OTO has grown from about 2,200 members worldwide to nearly 4,000 members worldwide, including Minervals. The U.S. membership has grown from about 1,100 members. The U.S. membership has grown from about 1,100 members to over 1,500 members, including Minervals. U.S. Grand Lodge has held 9 biennial national OTO conferences, Noticons, each featuring a Gnostic Mass celebrated by Sor Helena and myself. We have regularized EGC administrative procedures with a view towards quality control and training of competent clergy. We have developed and implemented rites for baptism, confirmation, and ordination suitable for use throughout the U.S., and have held 2 convocations of EGC bishops to discuss EGC management and standards of performance for the Gnostic Mass. We have issued a guidance document titled the EGC Manual, setting forth our various policies regarding the Gnostic Mass and EGC administration. Last year, according to official reports from U.S. local bodies, the Gnostic Mass was celebrated 838 times under formal USGL auspices. There have been at least 3 attempts to film high-quality video productions of the Gnostic Mass with varying degrees of success. One of the difficulties faced by the producers of these videos, I think, is that there really is no single definitive way to interpret and perform the rubric of Liber 15, XV, when it comes down to some of the fine details. However, local performance standards for the Gnostic Mass have become much more refined and thoughtful. However, local performance standards for the Gnostic Mass have become much more refined and thoughtful in recent years. And I hope the first edition of this book has been at least partly responsible for that. My intent, niety, though, has never been to create a rigid, dogmatic, ossified performance standard, even on a regional or local basis, or even in my own practice. I think there's a great deal of room for stylistic variation within the written rubric of Liber 15. But I also think that a reasonable and straightforward interpretation of that rubric should be adhered to, especially with respect to public celebrations of the Gnostic Mass. As for interpretations of the symbolism of the Gnostic Mass, I'd advise maintaining an open mind and not becoming fixated on any specific interpretation or set of interpretations. A true symbol is not merely a cipher, a glyph concealing a specific meaning. A true symbol is a confluence of meanings and functions, in part, to show their interrelatedness, which is itself another layer of meaning. A real symbol has a sort of life and intelligence of its own, and gives up its knowledge gradually as the observer grows in his or her ability to grasp it. Liber 15 I think is composed of a multi-dimensional field of interconnected symbols, some of which themselves link to other symbols, and fields of symbols beyond the explicit scope of the rubric itself. With continued work, study, and an open mind, you'll continue to receive more of its teachings throughout your life. I'd like to thank my brilliant wife, Soror Helena, for her continued support and assistance in every aspect of this work. My hard-driving publisher, Marlene Cornelius, my meticulous and insightful editor, Ben Sandler, Frater Superior Hymenaeus Beta, and Tau Vincent II, Paradoxus Alpha, Martin P. Starr, and Richard Kaczynski for assistance with specific points of history and technical information. Love is the law. Love under will. Sabazius, 10th degree, T. Apirium, June 11, 2014, Common Era. Anu, V. 0 or 110 after the revelation in Cairo, Sol 20 degrees Gemini, Luna 3 degrees Sagittarius, Dies Mercure. Introduction to the first edition. Much of this work consists of historical research, Alhamdulillah. Introduction to the first edition. Much of this work consists of historical research and cross-referencing, which are relatively safe approaches in the world of Thelemic exegetics. However, in some chapters, we have ventured to expound upon and even interpret portions of Liber 15, the Gnostic Mass. While Liber 15 is hardly a Class A publication, explaining and interpreting any of Crowley's writings is always risky business. Crowley, like all Kabbalists, realized the value of the use of multiple layers of meaning to create a vector to point toward an invisible or dangerous truth. Such layers of meaning are especially abundant in Liber 15. And the interpretive material contained herein is far from exhaustive. We have intentionally, and no doubt unintentionally as well, left many layers of meaning untouched. Rather than attempting to explain away or trivialize the mysteries of Thelemic Gnosticism in common language, we have sought to provide material which is suggestive of unfathomed depths of these mysteries, and which invites the reader to dive in and explore them. In his Confessions, Crowley stated that he wished to construct Liber 15 such that it would combine the most rigidly rational conceptions of phenomena with the most exalted and enthusiastic celebration of their sublimity, and that it would neither make nor imply any statement about nature which would not be endorsed by the most materialistic man of science. While Crowley's success in this undertaking is far from uncertain, his spirited attempt, in our opinion, greatly strengthened the appeal of Liber 15. However, the materialistic man of science is by no means necessarily a dogmatist of materialism. The true man of science is a man of open mind and wide learning. He will understand that the creations of the cognitive processes of mythology and theology have as great an effect on the human mind as the creation of the human sensory organs. Thus, in our exegesis, we have introduced ideas which may appear to some purists as wandering dangerously close to the realm of disputable metaphysical theories. We hope that such purists will be gracious enough to permit our readers to evaluate our comments in the light of their own lamps. In preparing our interpretive materials, we have endeavored to rely on Crowley's own writings whenever possible. Nevertheless, some of our own personal opinions have undoubtedly found their way into this work. Therefore, it is necessary for us to disclaim the interpretive material contained herein as representing strictly our own opinions and not those of OTO EGC, or anyone else. Each must always cut his or her own way through the jungle, even those who follow the footprints of others. For in the jungle, the underbush grows very quickly indeed. We would like to offer our warmest gratitude to our congregation and to all others who fellowship, aid, and guidance. We would like to offer our warmest gratitude to our congregation and to all others whose fellowship, aid, and guidance have enabled us to compile this work. The following individuals were particularly helpful, and we would like to offer them special thanks. Marlene and Jerry Cornelius and Pangenitor Lodge for graciously lending their time and skills to bring this work to life. Gray and April Abercrombie, Frater Ehubi, Sower Timshel, and Mont Salvat Camp and Baphomet Lodge for their constant support and assistance. Frater Leon, or Leon, for major help with historical materials. Frater Hunapu and Sower Ixul Balamke for help with material on the saints, particularly on Sir Richard Payne Knight. Marcus Jungwirth for the translation of Russ's version of Liber 15, Sower Merrill and Frater Hallel for their pioneering work in Thelemic liturgical studies. Sower Nuntius and Ouroboros Camp for hosting an ongoing discussion area for the Gnostic Mass and EGC issues on the electronic BBS modem magic 619-447-5010, for which much of this material was originally developed. Frater Sharash for the title page art, Rose Dawn for explaining the Anjali Mudra, Tau Sir Hasirum, Frater Junitus, Keith Shurhos, Michael Jordan, Louis Alvarado, Bill Heydrich, Martin P. Starr, Tau Charles Harmonious II of Iglesia Gnostique Catholique Apostolique, and Tau Johannes XIII of Iglesia Gnostica Apostolica Catholica, Iglesia Gnostica Apostolica Catholica, and Frater Iacus in Sower Chile for inspiration in the beginning. Finally, our most profound gratitude goes to Tau Silenus, aka Hymenaeus Beta, whose trust and encouragement made this work possible. Tau Apirion and Sower Helena, Grand Terrace, California, June 21st, 1995, Era Vulgar. Table of Contents. Part 1. History. 1. History of the Gnostic Catholic Church. 2. The structure and liturgy of the French Gnostic Catholic Church. Part 2. The Gnostic Mass. Introduction 1. Introduction to the Gnostic Mass. 2. The Gnostic Mass. 3. The Creed of the Gnostic Catholic Church and examination. 4. The Thelemic Calendar. 5. The Collects. 6. Symbolism of the Gnostic Mass Temple. 7. The Qibla. 8. Greek words and phrases in the Gnostic Mass. 9. The formula of Tetragrammaton. 10. Gestures used in the Gnostic Mass. 11. A curious investigation concerning alchemy in the Mass. Part 3. Portraits of the Saints of the Gnostic Catholic Church. Lao Tzu, Siddhartha, Krishna, Tahuti, Moshe, Dionysus, Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, two Megatherion, Hermes, Pan, Priapus, Osiris, Melchizedek, Chem, Amun, Mintu, Heracles, Orpheus, Odysseus, Virgilius, Catullus, Martialis, Rabelais, Swinburne, Apollonius Dianus, Simon Magus, Manus, Pythagoras, Basilidas, Valentinus, Bardesanes, Hippolytus, Merlin, Arthur, Camuret, Parzival, Carolus Magnus and his paladins, William of Chiron, Frederick Hohenstaufen, Roger Bacon, Jacobus Burgundus, Molensus the Martyr, Christian Rosenkreutz, Ulrich von Hutten, Paracelsus, Michael Mayer, Roderick Borgia, Pope Alexander VI, Jacob Bohem, Francis Bacon, Lord Verulam, Andrea, Robertus de Fluctibus, Giordano Bruno, Johannes D., Sir Edward Kelly, Thomas Vaughan, Elias Ashmole, Molinos, Adam Weishaupt, Wolfgang von Goethe, William Blake, Ludovicus Rex Bavaria, Richard Wagner, Alphonse Louis Constant, Frederick Nietzsche, Hargrave Jennings, Carl Kellner, Forlong Du, Sir Richard Payne Knight, Sir Richard Francis Burton, Paul Gauguin, Dr. Gerard Nkuse, Dr. Theodore Roos, Sir Aleister Crowley. Additional names included in the list of saints by Theodore Roos: Dante Alighieri, Ludwig von Fischer, Franz Hartmann, Charles Detra. Part 4. EGC in America. 1. The role and function of Thelemic clergy. 2. The sacramental system. 3. Sacramental rites. Ceremony of baptism of a child. Ceremony of baptism of an adult. Confirmation ceremony. Ordination of a deacon. Last rites. A feast for life. A wedding ceremony. A greater feast for death. Consecration of the oil. Administration to the sick. 4. Book list for EGC priests and priestesses. Appendix. Roman numeral 1. Roos's translation of Liber 15. Roman numeral 2. Manifesto of the Gnostic Catholic Church by W.B. Crow. Roman numeral 3. A brief biography of Dr. Arnoldo Krum Heller. Roman numeral 4. A fragment of Apophis Magelli. Mystery of Mysteries, a book by Sabazius, or Sabazius 10, USGL of OTO and Tau Helena. Chapter 1, The History of the Gnostic Catholic Church. Jules Doniel and the Gnostic Church of France. The founder of the Gnostic Church was Jules Benoit Stanislas Doniel Duval Michel, 1842 to 1903. Doniel was a librarian, a Grand Orient Freemason, an antiquarian, and a practicing spiritist. In his frequent attempts at communication with spirits, he was confronted with a recurring vision of divine femininity under various aspects. He gradually developed a conviction that his destiny involved his participation in the restoration of the feminine aspect of divinity to its proper place in religion. In 1888, while working as archivist for the Library of Orleans, he discovered an original charter dated 1022, which had been written by Canon Stephen of Orleans, a schoolmaster and forerunner of the Cathars, who taught Gnostic doctrines. Stephen was burned later the same year for heresy. Doniel became fascinated by the drama of the Cathars and their heroic and tragic resistance against the forces of the Pope. He began to study their doctrines and those of their predecessors, the Bogomils, the Paulicians, the Manichaeans, and the Gnostics. As his studies progressed, he became increasingly convinced that Gnosticism was the true religion behind Freemasonry. One night in 1888, the Eon Jesus appeared to Doniel in a vision and charged him with the work of establishing a new church. He spiritually consecrated Doniel as Bishop of Montserrat and Primate of the Albigenses. After his vision of the Eon Jesus, Doniel began attempting to contact Cathar and Gnostic spirits in seances in the Salon of Maria de Maria Tegue, Lady Caithness, Duchess de Medina Pomar. Doniel had long been associated with Lady Caithness, who was a prominent figure in the French Spiritist circles of the time, a disciple of Anna Kingsford, and leader of the French branch of the Theosophical Society. She considered herself a reincarnation of Mary Stuart. And, interestingly, a Spiritist communication in 1881 had foreshadowed to her a revolution in religion, which would result in a new age of Our Lady of the Holy Spirit. Doniel's Gnostic seances were attended by other notable occultists of various sects, including the Abbe Roca, an ex-Catholic priest and close associate of Stanislas de Laeta, and Oswald Wirth. Communications from the spirits were generally received by means of a pendulum suspended by Lady Caithness over a board of letters. At one seance, Doniel received the following communication: I address myself to you because you are my friend, my servant, and the prelate of the Albigensian Church. I am exiled from the Pleroma, and it is I whom Valentinus called Sophia Achemoth. It is I whom Simon Magus called Helena Enoia. For I am the eternal androgyne. Jesus is the Word of God. I am the thoughts of God. One day I shall remount to my Father, but I require aid in this. It requires the supplication of my brother Jesus to intercede for me. Only the infinite is able to redeem the infinite, and only God is able to redeem God. Listen well. The one has brought forth one, then one. And the three are but one, the Father, the Word, and the thought. Establish my Gnostic church. The demiurge will be powerless against it. Receive the Paraclete. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إنا أعطيناك الكوثر فصل لربك وانحر إن شانئك هو الأبتر. At other seances, the canon Stephen and one Wilhubert de Castres, Cathar bishop of Toulouse in the 12th century, who was martyred at Montserrat, were contacted. At another seance in September of 1889, the Very High Synod of Bishops of the Paraclete, consisting of 40 Cathar bishops, manifested and gave their names, which were later checked against the records in the National Library and proved to be accurate. The head of the synod was Wilhubert de Castres, who addressed Doniel and instructed him to reconstitute and teach the Gnostic doctrine by founding an assembly of the Paraclete, to be called the Gnostic Church. Helena Enoia was to assist him, and they were to be spiritually wedded. The assembly was to be composed of Parfates and Parfetes, or Parfates and Parfatus, and was to take for its holy book the fourth gospel, the Gospel of John. The church was to be administered by male bishops and female Sophias, who were to be elected and consecrated according to the Gnostic rite. Doniel proclaimed the year 1890 as the beginning of the era of Gnosis restored. He assumed the office of Patriarch of the Gnostic Church under the mystic name of Valentine II, in homage to Valentinus, the 5th century founder of the Valentinian school of Gnosticism. He concentrated a number of bishops, all of whom chose a mystic name, which was prefaced by the letter Tau, to represent the Greek Tau cross or the Egyptian Ankh. Among the first of the bishops and Sophias concentrated by Doniel were Gerard and Usse, also known as Papus, as Tau Vincent, Bishop of Toulouse. Later in 1890, Doniel joined the Martinist order of Papus, and swiftly became a member of its Supreme Council. Paul Cédar, real name Ivan Leloupe, 1871 to 1826, as Tal Paul, coadjutor of Toulouse. Luthien Samuel, real name Luthien Mauchel, as Tal Bar Desane, Bishop of La Rochelle and Saints. Louis Sophron Fougeron, born 1846, as Tal Sophronius, Bishop of Béziers. Albert Jonet, 1863 to 1923, as Tal Théodote, Bishop of Avignon. Marie Chauvel de Chauvigny, 1842 to 1927, as Esclarmonde. Sophia of Varsovie and Leonoce Eugene Joseph Fabre de Essarts, 1848 to 1917, as Tal Senicius, Bishop of Bordeaux. The church consisted of 3 levels of membership: the high clergy, the low clergy, and the faithful. The high clergy consisted of male-female pairs of bishops and sophias, who were responsible for church administration. They were elected by their congregations and later confirmed in office by formal consecration by the patriarch. The low clergy consisted of pairs of deacons and deaconesses who acted under the direction of the bishops and sophias and were responsible for conducting the day-to-day church activities. The faithful, with a capital F, or lay members of the church, were referred to as parfaits, male, and parfaites, female, designations which translated as perfect and which derived from Catharism. However, in Doniel's church, the term perfect was not understood in the Cathar sense as someone who had taken strict vows of asceticism, but was interpreted as including 2 higher divisions of the Valentinian threefold classification of the human race: the pneumatics and the psychics, but excluding the lower division, the materialistic hylics. Only individuals judged to be of high intelligence, refinement, and open mind were admitted to Doniel's Gnostic church. Doniel's Gnostic church combined the theological doctrines of Simon Magus, Valentinus, and Marcus, a later Valentinian noted for his development of the mysteries of numbers and letters and of the mystic marriage, with sacraments derived from the Cathar Church and conferred in rituals which were heavily influenced by those of the Roman Catholic Church. At the same time, the Gnostic Catholic Church was intended to present a system of mystical masonry. A Gnostic Mass called the Fraction du Pain, or breaking of the bread, was composed. The sacramental liturgy of the Church was completed by the inclusion of 2 Cathar sacraments: The consolamentum of the appariamentum. Leo Texil. In 1881, a young anti-clericalist named Gabriel Antoine Joran Pages was made a Freemason. Within a year, he resigned from Masonry, converted to Catholicism, and began one of the most notorious propaganda campaigns in the history of occultism. Under the pseudonym Leo Texil, Joran published a number of books and articles in which he proved that Freemasonry, Rosicrucianism, Martinism, and other similar organizations were utterly satanic in nature, and posed a dire threat to Christian European civilization. According to Texil, all such organizations were secretly controlled by the mysterious Order of the Palladium, a ruthless, terrible, and extremely secretive body within the heart of Freemasonry, which worshipped the devil with inhuman rites and received commands directly from the Prince of Darkness himself. The Palladists were allegedly headed by Albert Pike, Sovereign Grand Commander of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, and a high priestess named Diana Vaughan, or Vaughan. Miss Vaughan, or Vaughan, a direct descendant of the 17th century Rosicrucian and alchemist Thomas Vaughan, had been corresponding with Texil. Her heart had evidently been softened by one too many child sacrifices, and she had secretly written to Texil to inquire about how she might be saved. Her correspondence also revealed many shocking secrets of the devilish world of the Masonic inner circle. Luciferian symbolism contained in seemingly innocent emblems and phrases. Gruesome human sacrifices and obscene phallic orgies conducted in hidden chambers of infernal worship carved beneath the rock of Gibraltar, and terrifying conspiracies for world satanic domination. Needless to say, Joran Texil's works became quite popular. They rapidly gained him the notice and smug patronage of the Roman Catholic Church, and he even obtained an official audience with Pope Leo XIII in 1887. Ultimately, Mrs. Vaughan, by then very famous, decided once and for all to renounce Satan and convert to Catholicism. The church eagerly anticipated her public introduction, which Joran Texil scheduled for April 19, 1897. In Thelemic dating, this is both the year, likely Jewish year, corrected, 5,000. This is Christopher Neal speaking, the reader, not from the book. 5,978. Or it is the year 59,783. Sol was 29 degrees Aries, Luna 21 degrees Pisces, Dies Jovis, Thursday, again April 19, 1887, And I've estimated 3 p.m., for this is the time said to be when Jesus is most active within the Sufi tradition. p.m. To a lecture hall, once again, ultimately Ms. Vaughan, or Vaughan, by then world famous, decided once and for all to renounce Satan and convert to Catholicism. The church eagerly anticipated her public introduction, which Jogan Taksil scheduled for April 19, 1897, to a lecture hall filled with Catholic clergy and Freemasons. Jogan revealed in introducing her because she had never been a high priestess of the Palladius. In fact, there have never been an order of the Palladium. He, Gabriel Jogan, had fabricated the entire story as a monumental joke at the expense of the church. He had remained a faithful anti-clericalist all along. The Masons present found this revelation intensely amusing. The Catholic clergy present did not. Fortunately, for the proprietors of the lecture hall, the police were summoned before a full-scale riot had broken out. Jogan's success had been due primarily to his journalistic flair and to the credibility he enjoyed as a result of his enormous erudition. However, another significant factor in his success was his shrewd recruitment of a number of strategic and totally unwitting collaborators. Doniel's defection. In 1895, Jules Doniel suddenly abdicated as patriarch of the Gnostic Church, resigned from his Masonic lodge, and converted to Roman Catholicism under the pseudonym Jean Kostka. He attacked the Gnostic Church, Masonry, and Martinism in a book called Lucifer Unmasked. For the next 2 years, Doniel collaborated with Taksil in articles denouncing the organizations that were formerly so much a part of his life. Lucifer Unmasked itself was probably a collaborative effort. Its style betrays Jogan Taksil's hand. Ngosse remarked later that Doniel had lacked the necessary scientific education to explain without trouble the marvels which the invisible world squandered on him. Therefore, Ngosse theorized Doniel faced a choice between conversion or madness, and said Ngosse, "Let us be thankful that the patriarch of the Gnosis has chosen the first way." Doniel's defection was a devastating blow to the Gnostic Church, but it managed to survive. Interim control of the church was assumed by the synods of bishops, and at a high synod in 1896, they elected one of their bishops, Leonce Eugene Fabre de Essarts, known as Tau Senicius, to succeed Doniel as patriarch. Fabre de Essarts was a Parisian occultist, a symbolist poet, and a scholar of the Gnosis and esoteric Christianity. He and another Gnostic bishop, Louis Sophron Fougueron Dau Sophronius, a physician who was also a scholar of the Cathars and the Knights Templar, entered into a collaborative relationship to continue the development of the Gnostic Church. Together, they began to shift the emphasis of the teachings of the Gnostic Church away from Gnostic theology and towards a more general view of occult science. In 1899, 2 years after Leo Texil had exposed his hoax, Doniel began to correspond with Fabre de Essarts. In 1900, he requested reconciliation with the Gnostic Church and readmission as a bishop. As his first act of consecration as patriarch of the Gnostic Church, Fabre de Essarts reconsecrated his former patriarch as Tau Jules, bishop of Alais and Mereport. In 1901, Fabre de Essarts consecrated 20-year-old Johnny Record 1881 to 1934 as Tau Johannes, Bishop of Lyon. Between 1903 and 1910, he concentrated 12 more Gnostic bishops, including Léon Champrenord, 1870 to 1925, as Tau Théophane, Bishop of Versailles, René Guénon, 1886 to 1951, as Tau Valentinius, Bishop of Alexandria, and Patrice Henty, 1883 to 1964, as Tal Basilide. After the death of Fabre de Essarts in 1917, the patriarchate of the Gnostic Church was assumed by Léon Champrenord, Tau Théophane. Champrenord was succeeded by Patrice Henty, Tau Basilide, in 1921, who put l'Église Gnostique de France to rest in 1926 in favor of Jean Brecord's Église Gnostique Universelle, l'Église catholique Gnostique. Jean Brecord, Tau Johannes, had been educated in a Roman Catholic seminary where he had studied for the priesthood, but he renounced his conventional religious pursuits at the age of 16 to pursue mystical occultism. He became involved with the Elate Church of Carmel and the Work of Mercy, founded in 1839 by Eugene Ventras, 1807 to 1875, and the Johannite Church of Primitive Christians, founded in 1803 by the Templar revivalists Bernard Raymond Fabre Palaprat, 1777 to 1838. He had met in Gosse in 1899 and had already joined the Martinist order. In 1907, with the encouragement, if not direct pressure, of Ngosse, Brecord broke from Fabre de Essarts to found his own schematic branch of the Gnostic Church. Fougueron decided to join Brecord. The primary motive for this schism seemed to have been the desire to create a branch of the Gnostic Church whose structure and doctrine would more closely parallel those of the Roman Catholic Church rather than those of the Cathar Church. For instance, it included an order of priesthood and baptism with water, and which would be more closely tied to the Martinist order. Doniel had been a Martinist. Brecord was a Martinist, but Fabre de Essarts was not. Brecord Fougueron and Encausse at first tentatively named their branch of the church l'Église catholique Gnostique, the Gnostic Catholic Church. It was announced as being a fusion of the three existing Gnostic churches of France: Doniel's Gnostic Church, Ventras's Carmelite Church, and Fabre-Balebrat's Johannite Church. In February of 1908, the Episcopal Synod of the Gnostic Catholic Church met again and elected Bricaud its patriarch as Tal Jean II. After 1809, in order to clearly distinguish the two branches of the Gnostic Church, the Église Gnostique of Fabre des Essarts became generally known as the Église Gnostique de France. The 1908 Paris Conference. On June 24, 1908, Ecosse organized an international Masonic and Spiritualist conference in Paris, at which he received, for no money, a patent from Theodore Rous, Merlin Peregrinus, 1855 to 1923, head of the OTO, to establish a supreme grand general of the unified rites of ancient and primitive masonry for the Grand Orient of France and its dependencies at Paris. In the same year, the name l'Église catholique Gnostique was changed to l'Église Gnostique Universelle, the Universal Gnostic Church. June 24, 1908 has a Thelemic date of Anu 4, Sol 2 degrees Cancer, Luna 18 degrees Taurus. It was a Wednesday. About 4 years later, two important documents were published: the Manifesto of the MMM. The MMM was the British section of OTO, which included the Gnostic Catholic Church in the list of organizations whose wisdom and knowledge are concentrated in OTO, and the Jubilee edition of the Oriflamme, the official organ of the Rus OTO, which announced that l'initiation in Couls's journal was the official organ of the Memphis and Mizraim rites and the OTO in France, with Encausse listed as the publisher. The precise details of the transactions of the 1908 Paris Conference are unknown. But based on the course of the subsequent events, the logical conclusion is that Encausse and Rous engaged in a fraternal exchange of authority, Rous receiving episcopal and primatial authority in l'Église, Memphis, and Mizraim. For his German branch of the church, Rous translated l'Église catholique Gnostique into German as Die Gnostische Katholische Kirche, GKK. While Encausse, Fougueron, and Bricaud changed the name of their French branch of the church to l'Église Gnostique Universelle, EGU, with Bricaud as patriarch. As with all of his other organizational acquisitions, Rous included the GKK under the umbrella of the OTO. For their part, Bricaud, Fougueron, and Encausse declared the EGU to be the official church of Martinism in 1911. The EGU and the Antioch succession. After assuming the Patriarchate of the Universal Gnostic Church, Bricot became friendly with Bishop Louis-Marie François Giraud. Who died in 1951, an ex-Trappist monk who traced his episcopal succession to Joseph René Velat Mar Timotheus, 1854 to 1929. Velat was a Parisian who had immigrated to America early in life. He was a lifelong religious enthusiast, but he was unable to find fulfillment within the strictures of the Roman Catholic Church. So, in America, he began a quest for a religious environment more congenial to his personality and ambitions. He wandered from sect to sect, serving for a time as a Congregationalist minister, later being ordained to the priesthood within the schismatic Old Catholic sect. He ultimately obtained episcopal consecration in 1892 at the hands of Bishop Antonio Francisco Xavier Alvarez, Mar Julius I, Bishop of the Syrian Jacobite Orthodox Church and Metropolitan of the Independent Catholic Church of Ceylon, Goa in India, who had in turn received consecration from Ignatius Peter III, Peter the Humble, Jacobite Orthodox Patriarch of Antioch. Velat consecrated Paolo Meraviglia Gulotti in 1900. Gulotti consecrated Jules Poissaillet or Husse, 1884 to 1912 and 1904. Husse consecrated Louis-Marie François Giraud in 1911, and Giraud consecrated Jean Bricot on July 21, 1913. The consecration was important for Bricot's church because it provided a valid and documented apostolic episcopal succession which was recognized by the Roman Catholic Church as valid but illicit, in essence, spiritually efficacious but unsanctioned and contrary to church policy. The apostolic succession was also widely perceived as reflecting a transmission of true spiritual authority in the Christian current, extending as far back as Saint Peter, and even further to Melchizedek. Whom the Druzi call Malik Daus, the semi-mythical priest-king of Salem, who served as priest to the Hebrew patriarch Abraham. It provided Bricot and his successors with the apostolic authority to administer the Christian sacraments, which was important because many of the members of the Martinist order were of the Catholic faith, but as members of a secret society were subject to excommunication if their Martinist affiliation became known. The EGU thus offered continued assurance of salvation to Catholic Christians who were Martinists or who wished to become Martinists. After Encause's death in 1916, the Martinist order and the French section of the Rites of Memphis and Mizraim and the OTO were briefly headed by Charles-Henri Bertrand Teeter, Detra died in 1918 and was succeeded by Brocard. On May 15, 1918, Brocard consecrated Victor Blanchard Tau Targilius, who had been secretary to Enclose and Detri. On September 18, 1919, Brocard reconsecrated Theodorus sub conditione. This term refers to a consecration which is intended to remedy some defect of a previous consecration, thereby endowing him with the Antioch succession, and appointed him Gnostic legate of the EGU to Switzerland. September 18, 1919, Era Vulgaris, 3 p.m. Central Standard Time, was Anu 15, Sol 24 degrees Virgo, Luna 13 degrees Cancer, Dies Joves, or Thursday. Disagreements soon erupted between Brocard and Blanchard over leadership of the Martinist order, which developed into a violent mutual hostility. Blanchard eventually broke with Brocard to form his own schematic Martinist order, which was to be known as the Martinist and Synarchic order. Blanchard's branch later participated in the formation of an ecumenical council of occult rites known by the initials FUDOSI, from which H. Spencer Lewis's AMORC drew much of its authority. In turn, Rigaud's branch, under his successor Constance Chevalion, or Chivillon, joined with R. Swinburne Clymer, Lewis's Rosicrucian adversary, to form a rival council called FUDOFSI. FUDOFSI. Blanchard went on to consecrate at least 5 other Gnostic bishops under his own authority, including Charles Arthur Horwath, who later reconsecrated sub conditione Patrice Genti Tau Basilide, the last patriarch of l'Iglesia Gnostique de France, who had previously been consecrated in Doniel's spiritual succession by Fabre de Essarts and Roger Minard Tau Ion II, who then consecrated Robert Ambelain Tau Robert in 1946. Ambelain proceeded to found his own Gnostic church, l'Iglesia Gnostique Apostolique. In 1953, the year of Blanchard's death, Ambelain consecrated at least 5 other Gnostic bishops under his own authority, including Charles Arthur Horwath, who later reconsecrated sub conditione Patrice Gentry Tau Basilide, the first patriarch of l'Église Gnostique de France, who had previously been consecrated in Doniel's spiritual succession by Fabre de Essarts and Roger Menard Tau Ion. called Malikdaus by the Druzi, the semi-mythical priest-king of Salem, who served as priest to the Hebrew patriarch Abraham. It provided Berkod and his successors with the apostolic authority to administer the Christian sacraments, which was important because many of the members of the Martinist order were of the Catholic faith, but as members of a secret society were subject to excommunication if their Martinist affiliation became known. The EGU thus offered continued assurance of salvation to Catholic Christians who were Martinists or who wished to become Martinists. After Encluse's death in 1916, the Martinist order and the French sections of the Rites of Memphis and Mizraim and the OTO were briefly headed by Charles Henri Detra. Detra died in 1918 and was succeeded by Berkod. On May 15, 1918, Berkod concentrated Victor Blanchard, Tau Targilios, who had been secretary to Encluse and Detra. May 15, 1918, Era Vulgaris was Anu 14, Sol 23 degrees Taurus, Luna 25 degrees Cancer. It was Dies Mercure, or Wednesday. On September 18, 1919, Berkod consecrated Theodore Rus sub conditione. This term refers to a consecration which is intended to remedy some defect of a previous consecration, thereby endowing him with the Antioch succession, and appointed him Gnostic legate of the EGU to Switzerland. September 18, 1919, Era Vulgaris at 3 p.m. was Anu 15, Sol 24 degrees Virgo, Luna 20 degrees Cancer, Dies Hovis, or a Thursday. Disagreements soon erupted between Berkod and Blanchard over the leadership of the Martinist order, which developed into a violent mutual hostility. Blanchard eventually broke with Berkod to form his own schismatic Martinist order, which was to be known as the Martinist and Synarchic order. Blanchard's branch later participated in the formation of an ecumenical council of occult rites known by the initials FUDOSI, from which H. Spencer Lewis's AMORC drew much of its authority. In turn, Berkod's branch, under his successor, Constance Chevillon, joined with R. Swinburne Clymer, Lewis's Rosicrucian adversary, to form a rival council called FUDOFSI. Blanchard went on to consecrate at least 5 other Gnostic bishops under his own authority, including Charles Arthur Horwath, who later reconsecrated sub conditione Patrice Genti Tau Basile de, the last patriarch of l'Église Gnostique de France, who had previously been consecrated in Daniel's spiritual succession by Fabre de Essarts, and Roger Menard Tau Eon 11, who then consecrated Robert Ambelain Tau Robert in 1946. Ambelain proceeded to found his own Gnostic church, the Iglesia Gnostique Apostolique, in 1953, the year of Blanchard's death. Ambelain consecrated at least 10 Gnostic bishops within the Iglesia Gnostique Apostolique, including Pedro Freire Tau Pierre, primate of Brazil. Andre Maior Tau Andreas, primate of Franche-Comté, and Roger Pomery Tau Jean, titular bishop of Macheronte. Brecourt died on February 21, 1934, and was succeeded as Patriarch of the EGU and as Grand Master of the Martinist Order by Constance Chevillon Tau Harmonious. February 21, 1934, Era Vulgaris at 3 p.m. was Anu I-7 or 29, Sol 2 degrees Pisces, Luna 9 degrees Gemini, Dies Mercuri, or a Wednesday. Chevillon was consecrated by Giraud in 1936, and he subsequently consecrated a number of bishops himself, included R. Swinburne Clymer in 1938 and Arnold Crum Heller, founder of the Fraternitas Rosicruciana Antiqua, and Rousse's OTO representative for South America in 1939. During World War II, the Vichy puppet government of occupied France banned all secret societies, and on April 15, 1942, the EGU was officially dissolved by the government. April 15, 1942, Era Vulgaris is Anu I-16 or 38, Sol 25 degrees Aries, Luna 28 degrees Aries, Dies Mercuri, or a Wednesday. On March 22nd, 1944, Chevillon was brutally assassinated by soldiers of Klaus Barbie's occupation forces. March 22nd, Era Vulgaris. March 22nd, 1944, Era Vulgaris was Anu I-18 or 40, Sol 2 degrees Aries, Luna 9 degrees Pisces, Dies Mercuri, a Wednesday. The EGU was revived after the war, and in 1945, Tau Renatus was elected as the successor to the martyred Chevillon. Renatus was succeeded in 1948 by Charles-Henri Dupont, Thou Charles Henry, who stepped down in 1960 in favor of Robert Embelane, Thou Jean III, who had achieved considerable prominence through his writings. Embelane finally put l'Église Gnostique Universelle to rest in favor of his own Église Gnostique Apostolique. Thou Jean III was succeeded as patriarch of l'Église Gnostique Apostolique by André Maurer, Thou Andreas, in 1969, who was succeeded by Pedro Freire, Thou Pierre, Primate of South America, in 1970. The same year, Freire had been reconsecrated as Mar Petros Johannes XIII, Patriarch of l'Église Gnostique Catholique Apostolique, by Dom Antidio Vargas of the Brazilian Catholic Apostolic Church. On his death in 1978, Freire was succeeded by Edmond Fiji Thou Sialul I, who abdicated as patriarch in favor of his coadjutor Firmin Vale Amesti, Firmin Vale Amesti, Thou Valentinus III, who declined to accept the office, effectively putting l'Église Gnostique Apostolique as well as l'Église Gnostique Catholique Apostolique to rest as international organizations. A North American autocephalous or cephalous branch of l'Église Gnostique Catholique Apostolique survived under the leadership of Primate Roger Saint Victor Girard, Thou Charles, who consecrated a number of bishops but died in 1989 without appointing a successor. Several of Girard's bishops are still active in the U.S. The GKK and the EGC. Before proceeding, there is a note referencing the partial sentence, patriarch of, going back, the same year, Freire had been reconsecrated as Mar Petros Johannes XIII, Patriarch of l'Église Gnostique Catholique Apostolique by Dom Antedio Vargas of the Brazilian Catholic Apostolic Church. Note 14. The Brazilian Catholic Apostolic Church was founded in 1945 by Carlos Duarte Costa, Roman Catholic Archbishop of Botucatu, who was excommunicated by the Holy See for having criticized Pope Pius XII for blessing Nazi and fascist troops in St. Peter's Square in 1943. The GKK and the EGC. Aleister Crowley, 1875 to 1947, Allah yarhamahum, joined Rous's OTO as a 7th degree in 1910. At the time, any 33 Scottish Rite Mason could join OTO at the 7th degree level. On June 1, 1912, Crowley received from Rous the 9th degree. and his appointment as National Grand Master 10 degree for Ireland, Iona, and all the Britons. The British section of OTO was called Mysteria Mystica Maxima, or MMM, taking the name Baphomet as his magical title. June 1, 1912, Era Vulgaris, 3 p.m., is Anu 8, Sol 10 degrees Gemini, Luna 2 degrees Capricorn, Dies Saturni, or a Saturday. The next year, he published the Manifesto of the MMM, which includes the Gnostic Catholic Church, in the list of organizations whose wisdom and knowledge are consecrated in OTO. Crowley also wrote Liber 15, or XV, the Gnostic Mass, in 1913. Liber 15 was first published in 1918 in the International, then again in 1919 in the Equinox, Volume 3, Number 1, the Blue Equinox. Finally, in 1929-30, in Appendix 6 of Magic in Theory and Practice, Crowley adopted the Latin name Ecclesia Gnostica Catholica, EGC, for use in Liber 15. Rigaud had used this name in the title of a Mass he circulated around 1908, but it was not generally used prior to Crowley's use of it in Liber 15. In chapter 73 of Crowley's Confessions, he states that he wrote the Gnostic Mass as the ritual of the Gnostic Catholic Church, which he prepared for the use of the OTO, the central ceremony of its public and private celebration. Corresponding to the Mass of the Roman Catholic Church, it is evident that Crowley viewed the Gnostic Catholic Church and the OTO as inseparable, particularly with respect to the 9th degree of OTO, into which Crowley had been initiated the year before he wrote the Gnostic Mass, and which is termed the sovereign sanctuary of the Gnosis. In 1918, Roos translated Crowley's Gnostic Mass into German, making a number of editorial modifications, and published it under the auspices of OTO. In his publication of the Gnostic Mass, Roos listed Rigaud as the sovereign patriarch of l'Église Gnostique Universelle, and himself as both the Gnostic legate to Switzerland for l'Église Gnostique Universelle, and as the sovereign patriarch and primate of Die Gnostische Katholische Kirche, a title which he may have received at the 1908 Paris Conference. Crowley's Gnostic Mass, despite its structural similarities to the Mass of the Roman Catholic Church, is expressly a Thelemic ritual rather than a Christian one. Roos's translation preserved the essential Thelemic Gnostic character of the ritual, although it indicates that Roos's publication of the Gnostic Mass was a significant event for two reasons. It represented the declaration of independence of Ecclesia Gnostica Catholica from Eglise Gnostique Universelle, and it represented the Church's formal acceptance of the law of Thelema at the highest level. the modern EGC. After Rus, the succession to leadership of the Thelemic Gnostic Catholic Church within OTO passed to his successor as outer head of the order, OHO, Aleister Crowley, whose accession in 1922 restored the original version of the Gnostic Mass. Crowley appears to have celebrated the Gnostic Mass a number of times at his Abbey of Thelema in Cefalù, Sicily. He also made an audio recording of the Gnostic Mass sometime during the 1930s with a singer named Dolores Cilarno singing the lines of the priestess. But only portions of this recording seem to have survived. It is unclear whether Charles Stansfield Jones, 1886 to 1950, who served as Grand Master 10th degree for North America under both Rus and Crowley, ever celebrated the Gnostic Mass as part of his OTO activities. However, one of the members of his Agape Lodge in Vancouver, British Columbia, was a man named Wilfred T. Smith, 1887 to 1957. Smith moved to Southern California in 1920s. Smith moved to Southern California in the 1920s and in 1930 began to assemble an OTO working group in Hollywood. This group began to celebrate the Gnostic Mass on a weekly basis in 1933. And in 1935, the group was chartered as Agape Lodge, the second OTO lodge of that name. The next year, Crowley appointed Smith as National Grand Master General, X degree or 10th degree, for the United States. The Gnostic Mass was celebrated every Sunday evening at Agape Lodge by Smith and priestess Regina Cahill, 1891 to 1945, from 1933 until 1942, when the lodge moved to a new facility in Pasadena, California. Note 17. A rumor was once circulated to the effect that the Gnostic Mass, as celebrated at Agape Lodge, included explicit sexual conduct. According to surviving members of Agape Lodge, the rumor was entirely spurious. The text of Liber 15 was followed closely, and the priestess always appeared fully clothed. Jane Wolfe, 1875 to 1958, who had studied with Crowley personally during the 1920s in Cefalù, assisted Smith and Cahill in developing a standard of performance for the Gnostic Mass, and frequently served as deacon in the ceremony. Crowley died in 1947 and was succeeded as OHO by Carl Germer Saturnus, 1885 to 1962. During Yimmer's tenure as OHO, the only group regularly celebrating the Gnostic Mass was the Swiss OTO under Hermann Metzger, 1919 to 1990, which began celebrating the Gnostic Mass in the 1970s at its temple and shrine. Ymer, often called Germer, died in 1962. Without naming a successor, the OTO was dormant in the U.S. from 1962 until 1969, when Grady McMurtry, Hymenaeus Alpha, 1918 to 1985, Allah Yahamahum, the last ranking officer of OTO International Headquarters remaining active, exercised emergency powers granted to him in the 1940s by Crowley and acceded to the office of Caliph and OHO of OTO. In July of 1977, Hymenaeus Alpha and the members of the newly revived OTO formally celebrated the Gnostic Mass, the first time in the U.S. since the days of Agape Lodge. Unlike the other organizations encompassed by OTO, EGC has its own published ritual, which could be practiced outside the context of the OTO initiation structure. The Gnostic Mass has its own officers, although the ritual calls for them to make use of the signs of various OTO degrees. The officers do not have an immediately obvious correlation with OTO degrees. Liber 15 XV also refers to the administration of other sacramental rites such as baptisms, confirmations, marriages, and the ordination of clergy. The EGC could, theoretically, operate independently of OTO. In 1969, under Hymenaeus Alpha, a non-profit religious corporation independent of OTO was established under the name Iglesia Gnostica Católica. This was a well-intentioned but short-lived attempt to spread Thelema to a broader audience than it was believed OTO was able to do. The EGC developed its own policies and procedures for baptisms, confirmations, and ordinations, which are alluded to in Liber 15, and its own hierarchy of bishops, priests, priestesses, exorcists, novices, and deacons, largely based on the tradition of the Roman Catholic Church. Between fall 1984 and fall 1985, the independent EGC produced 4 numbers of a publication called Iglesia Gnostica. Grady McMurtry died in 1985, and in accordance with his wishes, his successor was elected by vote of the Sovereign Sanctuary of the Gnosis, the 9th degree membership of the OTO. His successor took the magical title Hymenaeus Beta. When Hymenaeus Beta took office, he perceived that the divergence of the paths of EGC and OTO would ultimately be unhealthy for the development of Thelema. The OTO required the focus and open structure provided by the regular celebration of the Gnostic Mass, and the EGC required the perspective and esoteric teachings of the OTO initiatory system. Hymenaeus Beta dissolved the EGC Corporation in 1985, and in 1987 reintegrated the EGC into the OTO by incorporating provisions into the OTO bylaws specifying that there was to be a class of OTO membership called ecclesiastical membership, which would consist of the bishops of the EGC, since it was believed at the time that cells of the Gnostic Catholic Church existed outside the OTO. Again, Hymenaeus Beta dissolved the EGC Corporation in 1985, and in 1987 reintegrated the EGC into the OTO by incorporating provisions in the OTO bylaws specifying that there was to be a class of OTO membership called ecclesiastical membership, which would consist of the bishops of the EGC, since it was believed at the time that cells of the Gnostic Catholic Church existed outside the OTO. Provisions were included in the bylaws which permitted the bishops of such branches to affiliate with OTO as ecclesiastical members upon mutual recognition. Note 18. The term was later corrected to Gnostic Church. The Gnostic Catholic Church officially ceased to exist outside OTO in 1908, when the name of Iglesia Catholic Gnostic was changed to Iglesia Gnostic Universale. This clause is now used only for the establishment of amicable relations rather than for conferral of actual episcopal authority in EGC. The ecclesiastical members were allowed to exercise their traditional episcopal powers with little interference. The new EGC, consisting of the ecclesiastical membership of OTO, published 4 numbers of a newsletter called Gnostic News, with a G, between December 1988 and September 1989. When the EGC converted from Christianity to Thelema, it ceased to be an institution dedicated to the administration of Christian sacraments. Therefore, a valid Christian apostolic succession was no longer of critical relevance. The traditional apostolic succession may be of some interest and value within the Thelemic EGC as an aspect of the traditions inherited from the pre-Thelemic French Gnostic Church, and as a form of symbolic successorship to the great Christian, Hebraic, and pagan religious systems of the past. However, for a church which purports to represent the Thelemic religion, an apostolic or sacerdotal succession from the prophet of Thelema is far more relevant, in a purely spiritual and theological sense, than a succession from the apostles of the Pale Galilean. However, it was commonly held within the EGC under Hymenaeus Alpha and for a time under Hymenaeus Beta as well that a valid traditional apostolic succession would increase the prestige of the EGC and help it to achieve recognition from the civil authorities. Attempts were made to demonstrate that Crowley himself possessed a valid Christian apostolic succession in the Villate line, or Villate line, through Theodore Rus. He almost certainly did not, and further attempts were made to strengthen the traditional apostolic succession within EGC by bringing in additional lines of succession from outside sources. Some OTO members were recognized as EGC bishops after receiving consecration from bishops outside the EGC. And certain bishops of other branches of the Gnostic Church were recognized as ecclesiastical members of OTO. A number of articles on the various putative lines of traditional apostolic succession within EGC were published in the Gnostic News. Unfortunately, the emphasis on the apostolic succession and the semi-autonomy of the bishops resulted in an erosion of central control. It came to be widely believed that the traditional apostolic succession, which could be passed from one individual to another, by the simple laying on of hands, was sufficient to become an EGC bishop. The practical function of the bishops as church administrators and overseers of the rites was becoming overshadowed by the mystique of the apostolic succession, and a number of unqualified individuals were consecrated as bishops without the requisite notification or preparation. Then, synchronistically, outside criticism began to raise serious doubts about the technical validity of the traditional apostolic succession current in the EGC. Also, with ecclesiastical membership limited to bishops, the role of the priests and priestesses and deacons as visible representatives of the EGC was undervalued. A number of priests and priestesses were ordained without so much as having ever attended a Gnostic Mass. The Church had reached a crisis of identity, and a fundamental reassessment of its structure, its relationship with OTO, the roles of its officers, and the relevance of the traditional apostolic succession and other such residual pre-Thelemic institutions was in order. In the fall of 1990, Hymenaeus Beta suspended the consecration of bishops within EGC until policies could be developed which would establish formal qualifications for ecclesiastical membership. This was accomplished in the fall of 1991 by the adoption of a policy which expanded the definition of ecclesiastical membership to include priests, priestesses, and deacons, and which required ordained officers of EGC to be initiated members of specific rank, of specified rank within OTO before they would be formally recognized as such by OTO. Deacons were required to be at least first-degree members of OTO and thus full members of the order. Priests and priestesses were required to be initiates of the degree of KEW, which falls between 4 and 5 degree, or the 4th and 5th degree. The first degree in the OTO series, to which admission is by invitation only, and bishops were required to be of at least the 7th degree, which gives them the power to initiate the KEW degree and thus to ordain priests and priestesses. In 1993, an outline of a Thelemic baptism ritual written by Aleister Crowley was discovered and has been incorporated into the EGC system as the liturgical and ministerial wing of the Ordo Templi Orientis. The Gnostic Catholic Church continues to develop and evolve with the growth of its membership, the creative input of its officers, and the progressive manifestation of the Thelemic Gnostic egregore. The process has not been without its difficulties, but to paraphrase Libre, in trials and troubles is strength, and by their means is a pathway opened unto the light. The following are a list of references at the end of Chapter 1. Anson Peter F., Bishops at Large, Faber and Faber, London, 1964. Brandreth, Henry R.T., Episcopi Vagantes, and the Anglican Church, 2nd edition, SPCK, London, 1961. Bricard, Jean, Catéchisme gnostique à l'usage des fidèles de la Iglesia Católica Gnostique, Lyon, 1907. Bricard, Jean, L'Historie de la Gnoste, unpublished. Kamel, Charles Richard, Aleister Crowley, The Man, the Mage, the Poet. University Books, Inc., New Hyde Park, New York, 1962. Clymer R. Swinburne, The Rosicrucian Fraternity in America. Volume 2, Rosicrucian Foundation, Quakertown, Pennsylvania. Cole Guinness, Robert M., Tau Charles Harmonius II, A Historical Brief of the Gnostic Catholic Ecclesia, privately published by Église Gnostique Catholique Apostolique, Synod des États Unis de Amérique du Nord, Bellwood, Illinois. Joët de la Thibauderie de Elon Yvon, Iglesias et évêques catholiques non romains, Dervy Livres, Paris, 1962. Frick, Carl, R.H., Licht and Finsternis, Gnostische Theosophik und Freimorik, Okkot, Geheimgesellschaften bis an die Wende, Zoom 20, dat Jahrhundert, akademisch Druck, U, Welangsandstort, Graz, Austria, 1972. Gerard Pierre, Sects and Rites, Petites Iglesias, Religions Nouvelles, Sociétés Secrètes de Paris. Editions Emile Paul, Freres, 1954. Gilbert, R.A., Baphomet and Son, in Spectrum, No. 5. Goodrich, Norma Lore, The Holy Grail. HarperCollins, New York, 1992. Harper C., The Matthew Succession in the EGC, in Gnostic News, Volume 1, No. 4, Autumnal Equinox, 1989. Hendrick William E., What is the Gnostic Catholic Church? In Gnostic News, Volume 1, No. 2, Spring Equinox, 1989. Herard Roger St. Victor Tau Charles, Universal Apostolic Autocephalous Gnostic Church of North America, privately published, Chicago, 1979. Howell Ehrlich, Theodore Roos, Irregular Freemasonry in Germany, 1900 to 23, in Aris Quatuor Coronati, February 1978. Hymenaeus Beta on the Gnostic Catholic Church in the Magical Link, Volume 3, Number 4, Winter 1990. Hunig, P.R., Das Otio Phenomenon 12. Die Wandernden Bischof in Abra had Abra, November 1991. Les Forestiers René, le Occultisme in France au 19th et 20th siècles, l'Église gnostique, ouvrage inédit publié par Antoine Favre, Archie, Milano, 1990. Mackintosh Christopher, Eliphas Levy, and the French Occult Revival, Ryder & Co., London, 1972. Merlin Peregrinus, Theodore Roos, INRIOTO, Ecclesiae Gnostique Catholique Canon Lycée der Gnostische Messe, privately published by the Oriflame, 1918, translated by Marcus M. Jungwirth, 1991. Merlin Peregrinus, Theodore Roos, Unser Orden, and Mysteria Mystica Maxima in Oriflame, Jubileums Ausgabe, Ludwig Schaffin, 1912. Müller, Helmut und Elchau, Merlin Peregrinus, vom Untergrund des Abendlandes, Hohenhausen and Newman, Würzburg, 1986. Rhodes, Henry T.F., The Satanic Mass, The Citadel Press, Secoscus, New Jersey, 1954, 1974. Secular Phyllis, Jane Wolfe, The Sword, Hollywood, in the Continuum, Volume 3, Number 4, College of Thelema, Oroville, California, 1983. Thou Dionysus, Gnostics and Templars in Gnostic News, Volume 1, Number 3, Summer Solstice, 1989. Thou Sir Hasidim, The Gnostic Catholic Church in Gnostic News, Volume 1, Number 3, Summer Solstice, 1989. Wait, Arthur Edward, Devil Worship in France, George Redway, London, 1896. Webb, James, The Occult Establishment, Library Press, LaSalle, Illinois, 1976. Webb, James, The Occult Underground, Library Press, LaSalle, Illinois, 1974. Anno 116 Sol 23 degrees Leo, Luna 14 degrees Cancer, Dies Saturni, August 15, 2020, Era Vulgaris, 8:30 p.m. Do what thy wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law, love under will. Mystery of Mystery, a primer of Thelemic Ecclesiastical Gnosticism, Part 1, Chapter 2, the structure and liturgy of the French Gnostic Church of Jules Doniel. The theology of Doniel's Gnostic Neo-Albigensian Church was based on a study of early Gnosticism, primarily that of Simon Magus and Valentinus. Its sacraments were derived from Catharism, and its structure and liturgy were based on a blend of Roman Catholicism, Catharism, and Freemasonry. The church was governed by the Most High Synod, which consisted of all the bishops in Sophia's, female bishops. The Most High Synod elected the Patriarch as its president for life and the temporal chief of the clergy and the church. The spiritual chief of the church was considered to be the celestial Sophia herself. The Patriarch, who was considered to be the direct successor to the Apostle John, was empowered to promulgate decisions on his own accord, suspend or depose bishops, approve or annul their elections, veto the decrees of the synod, excommunicate and reconcile the members of the church, and create dioceses. He signed the double tau before his mystic name and was addressed as Your Grace. Each bishop was elected by a convened college of the faithful and the deacons. He chose a mystic name, which he signed with a tau, and the title Electus Episcopus. However, the bishop-elect did not possess his full powers until after his consecration by the Patriarch, which was performed only after his election was confirmed by the Most High Synod and approved by the Patriarch. The bishops and the Sophias were addressed as Your Lordship or Ladyship, Votre Signore, and wore upon their right hands a silver ring in which was set an amethyst. One bishop and one Sophia were, as a couple, in charge of each diocese, which encompassed several churches or congregations. The bishop officiated in person at the church located at the place of his residence. Each individual congregation was administered by a deacon and a deaconess who were ordained by the bishop. The body of the faithful consisted of the perfect, the men who were termed the parfaits, and the women parfaites. Admission as a parfait or parfaite was obtained through the rite of the consolamentum, which was administered by the bishop, or by a deacon if the bishop was unavailable. The Gnostic Church accepted the Valentinian doctrine that humanity is divided into three fundamental classes: the spiritual pneumatics, to whom the gnosis is natural; the materialistic hylics, for whom the gnosis was unreachable; and the intermediate psychics, for whom the gnosis was attainable only through effort. However, it did not accept the rigid determinism of the Valentinian doctrine. It recruited its faithful among those men and women whose culture and open-mindedness rendered them capable of seizing the significance of its doctrines, and of thus ultimately obtaining the gnosis and becoming pneumatic. Gross and uncouth individuals were excluded as highlights from the community. The principal ceremonies of the Gnostic Church included the consolamentum, the appariamentum, the consecration of bishops, and the fraction du pain. The consolamentum, or baptism of the Spirit, was a mystic initiation ritual in which aspirants were brought into spiritual communion with the Gnostic Paraclete. It was based on the Cathar ceremony of the same name, in which a simple believer became a parfait, corresponding to the Manichaean sealing in which a hearer became an elect. To the Cathars, the consolamentum encompassed the function of baptism, confirmation, and ordination in a single, simple ceremony. It was also considered to be an essential prerequisite to salvation, and to guarantee salvation if the console kept his or her vows. In Doniel's Gnostic Church, the consolamentum was not considered to be an absolute prerequisite for salvation, and did not entail the strict obligations of the Cathar ceremony. The appariamentum was a sacrament of confession and absolution conferred at the request of a penitent who had previously received the consolamentum. It was intended to allow the penitent to come into closer communion with the pleroma. It was modeled after the Cathar ceremony of monthly public confession, but was revised so as to be administered privately, face to face, by the patriarch himself. In this ceremony, the penitent approached the patriarch with bound hands and confessed to guilt of a general nature, and to a fallen state like his mother Sophia Achamuth. He demanded the pardon of the eons through the intervention of the patriarch. The patriarch then granted his pardon, petitioning Helena Enoia to send a permanent eon protector to the penitent, and unbound his hands. The fraction du pain, or breaking of the bread, was the regular communal office of worship of the Gnostic Church. It was loosely modeled after the Cathar ceremony of the same name, and corresponded to the Roman Catholic Mass. As such, it constitutes a forerunner of our EGC Gnostic Mass. The breaking of the bread. The following is a brief description of the ceremony of the breaking of the bread of Doniel's Gnostic Church. The bishop is vested in a violet stole, wearing violet gloves on his hands, and the infula, a simplified mitre, upon his head. He wears a silver episcopal ring set with an amethyst on his right hand, and the sacred towel hangs upon his breast by a violet ribbon. He stands upright between the deacon and deaconess. Behind a table draped in white, It is simply a table, not an altar. The Cathars rejected any notion of the sanctity of physical objects. Upon the table of two candlesticks, between which rests the Greek Gospel of St. John, open on the first page. The parfaits, the women with heads covered by white veils, the men girded with white sashes, kneel and receive the Gnostic benediction of the bishop, which is given with 3 fingers in the sign of the Tao. Rising, they sing the canticle, Beati vos iones, vera vita vivete, vos emanationes, plura mates lucidi, adeste visions, stolis albis candidi. The bishop next recites the Lord's Prayer in Greek, Pater hemon ho en toi orano, hagias deato tu onoma su, el dito he basilia su, genatito tu thelema su, hos en oronoe kai epeges, ton orton hemon, ton epiosion dos hemon simoron, kai aphes hemon, kai aphes hymen, ta ophi lima te hymen, ta kai aphes hymen, ta ophi lima ta hemon, hos kai hemis afikamen, toi o hi letais hemon, kai me esan enkes himas ais perasmon, Allah harusai hemas apotau, poneu, ho tisu esten he basilia, kai he dynamis, kai he doxa, ais tau ayanas. Amen. The congregation responds, Amen. The deacon presents the chalice and the bread to the bishop, who imposes his hands thereon and says, Ion Jesus, prius quam patratur mestis, acceptit panem et vinum in sanctas manus suas et elevatis oculis ad coelum frigit. He breaks the bread. Benedicit. He forms the towel over the chalice and the bread. Et dedis discipulis sui descends. All assembly prostrate themselves. Accepite et manducate et bibate omnes. A slow processional is then played on the organ, and the bishop approaches the faithful. The deacon, carrying the paten, and the deaconess, holding the chalice, precede him. Taking up the bread, the bishop elevates it above his head and says, Toto estin to soma pneumatikon tau Christo. He rests it on the paten, kneels before it and adores. He rises, grasps the chalice, elevates it and says, Calix meos in Hebraeans quam preclarus est. Geletium salutaris accepium et nomen Domini invocabo, tuato esten tu aima pneumaticon tau Christo. He kneels again and adores. Finally, he eats a fragment of the spiritual body of the Aeon Jesus and drinks of the chalice of the divine blood. There is a brief pause during which the organ plays. The bishop then advances and stops before each of the faithful, offering to each one the bread and the chalice. After the last of the faithful has partaken of the bread and wine, there is an additional pause for meditation and adoration, during which the organ continues to play. The bishop then returns to his initial place behind the table. He extends his hands and says, "May the grace of the most holy pleroma be ever with you." The remains of the consecrated species are then burned on a chafing dish. The office is completed by the singing of a long canticle in French, whose first strophe is as follows: Salut, salut, royal mère, de éternel clété, salut, salut, pleroma, de la divinité, abîmé ou mar immense, oh, c'est moi la substance, mysteria de silence, de amour et de beauté. Translation: Hail, hail, kingdom of eternal brightness. Hail, hail, pleroma, fullness of the divinity. Abyss, O immense sea, where matter is set in motion. Mystery of silence, of love, and of beauty. The bishop gives the Gnostic benediction and retires, escorted by the deacon and deaconess, who carry with them the 2 candles from the table. When the patriarch officiates in person, he wears pallium, a wide satin scarf of a deep violet, embroidered with fine gold, which is placed on his shoulders. Its 2 tails drape equally to the front, rejoin at the height of the waist, and fall as far as the feet. On the part covering the shoulders is embroidered a white dove, holding in its beak a banner with the inscription in Greek letters, Tu Pneuma Hagion. The tails of the pallium are partly covered with an embroidery representing palm trees, which frame the letters SG, Sacra Gnosis. The Consolamentum. In the medieval Cathar Church, only the parfaits were allowed to preach or to recite the only approved prayer, the Lord's Prayer, which the parfait recited repetitively like a mantra. Not being purified, the believers were considered unfit to address God as Our Father. A 1-year probationary period was required before a Cathar believer was permitted to take the Consolamentum, during which time the candidate participated in fasts and was instructed in the complete Cathar doctrine, which was not available to the majority of believers. The ceremony was administered by the taking of vows, followed by the laying on of hands. The Cathars rejected baptism with water. After having been made perfect through the Consolamentum, the parfait was expected to abide by a strict and detailed code of asceticism. If through his or her own weakness a parfait violated his or her own vows, which included absolute chastity, the state of grace bestowed by the Consolamentum was lost for the parfait, as well as for anyone who had received the consolamentum from the parfait. It could only be regained by reconciliation after severe penance. Parfaits who doubted their ability to keep their vows were permitted to preserve their state of grace by undergoing another sacrament, the Endura. The Endura consisted of sacred suicide, usually by extended fasting or exposure. To become a member of the class of believers in the Cathar Church, one was required to promise to take the consolamentum at some point in one's life. However, few within the Cathar community were able to abide by its strict obligations, and believers were permitted to fulfill their promise by taking a special version of the consolamentum on their deathbeds. This sort of consolamentum was generally followed by the Endura. The consolamentum of Doniel's Gnostic Church, which modeled after the Cathar ceremony, the consolamentum of Doniel's Gnostic Church, while modeled after the Cathar ceremony, differed significantly in function and in implication. It did not confer a guarantee of salvation, nor was it considered to be an absolute prerequisite for salvation. Rather, it was considered as a mystic initiation ritual for those aspirants who wished to be symbolically brought into spiritual communion with the Gnostic Paraclete. Also, it did not require a long probationary period, did not require vows of asceticism, and was not considered as the dividing line between believer and parfait, between which no distinction was made. The term parfait was also understood in much more liberal sense. The term parfait was also understood in a much more liberal sense than in the original Cathar Church. The following is a brief description of the ceremony of the consolamentum of Doniel's Gnostic Church. The bishop is seated beside the table covered with a white cloth. On the table rests the fourth gospel, open between the two candles. The deacon and deaconesses are seated at the sides of the episcopal throne. The parfaits are lined up to the left of the table and the parfaits to the right. Each parfait has a white sash around his waist. Each parfait wears a white veil over her head and face. Those who are due to receive the sacrament are on their knees in the first row, candles in their hands. The assembly rises at the entry of the bishop and sings the canticle, Beati vos Iones. The deacon reads the first verses of the fourth gospel, first in Greek, then in French. In arche an ho logos, kai ho logos, an proston theon, kai theos an ho logos, hotos an en archai, proston theon, panta di otto I geneto, kai horis otto I geneto, vede hin ho gigonen, in ottoi zoe in zoe on, kai he zoe on, tu phoston anthropon, kai tu phos in te scotie phene, kai he scotie otto o catalaben. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. Through him all things became, and without him nothing became that has become. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shineth in the darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. The bishop delivers his homily, then the choir intones Pater Noster, to which the congregation responds, Amen. The deacon and deaconess lift the 2 candles from the table and flank the bishop as he removes the glove from the right hand and approaches the faithful who are to receive the consolamentum. These have relinquished their candles and remain on their knees, their hands joined. The women have raised their veils. The bishop imposes his hand successively upon the head of each consoli and says, Memur esto verbi tuo serve, tuo due, in que mihi spem dediste, haec me consolata est in humilitate mea. The consolee responds, Amen. The bishop kisses him or her on the forehead and says, Osculetur mi osculo ores suo. When the bishop has returned to his place on the throne, the choir sings the canticle of the Consolamente. Consolemini, consolemini, popule meos, consolitur mi misericordia tua, eruc tabum labia mia hymnum, concupidi salatare tum, atoliti portas, ione vestras, et elevamini porte pleromatis, consoletor mi misericordia tua. Amen. The bishop rises, the assembly kneels, the deacon and deaconess elevate their candles. The bishop gives the Gnostic benediction and says, Consoletur vos sanctissimum pleroma, eon Charistos, eon Sophia, et eon numa hagion. The choir responds, Amen, and the bishop retires. As the bishop retires, the choir sings, Domina salvam fac ecclesiam et exaudi nos indi qua invocaverimus te. Domino salvam fac patriarcham nostrum Valentinum et exaudi, etc. Domina salvos fac episcopos et exaudi, etc. The Aperialamentum. The following is a brief description of the ceremony of the Aperialamentum of Doniel's Gnostic Church. The petitioner addresses his or her request to the patriarch following the formula, in praise his grace the patriarch, that she may receive the holy Aperiamentum. The request is submitted to and approved by the bishop or the Sophia of the diocese. The patriarch then informs the bishop of the day when he will be able to receive the petitioner in the chapel. The petitioner is presented vested in black, head bare, hands tied with a white bandlet. He kneels before the patriarch, who is seated and vested with the pallium, and says, I come here before Numa Hagion to declare myself guilty and fallen, like my mother Sophia Achemuth, to renounce the works of the demiurge, and to demand the pardon of the holy aeons through you, your grace. The patriarch extends his hands upon the head of the penitent and says, Rimettuntor tibi peccata tua qua sunt peccata mundi. Amen. He then imposes the right tail of the pallium on the head of the faithful and says, Our Lady Sophia, Our Lady the Holy Spirit, Our Lady Hedone, remember your servant, who renounces the demiurge in his thoughts and in his works. Grant him an aeon protector, who may quit him nevermore. Amen. He then takes in his two hands the tied hands of the penitent, and briefly speaks to the penitent in private. He then unites the penitent's hands and says, "The aeon unbinds in the pleroma that which I unbind in the third world of the kinoma and of the void. By Helena Inoa, by Hedone, by Sophia are you assisted, and they are with you. Receive the mystic kiss." He kisses the penitent on the forehead by two kisses in the form of the tau. The penitent, kneeling and half prostrated, recites the first verses of the fourth gospel, rises and says, "God is love." He bows to his grace and goes out in silence. Remaining alone, the patriarch says an adoration for a quarter. Remaining alone, the patriarch stays in adoration for a quarter of an hour. The consecration of a bishop. The following is a description of the ceremony of consecration of a bishop in Doniel's Gnostic Church. The consecration of a bishop-elect takes place in the presence of the assembly of the parfaits and parfaits. The patriarch, assisted by two bishop consecrators, poses to the bishop-elect these questions. Do you believe in the most holy gnosis? Do you accept the two fundamental doctrines of the most holy gnosis, emanation and salvation by knowledge, as stated in the preliminary profession of faith? Do you accept the election and the charges which follow? After having responded affirmatively, the bishop-elect takes his place on a seat facing the patriarchal throne, while the deacon lights the two white candles. The patriarch and the two assistant bishops withdraw, preceded by the deacon who bears the double tau. The bishop-elect mediates and prays mentally, while the deaconess opens the book of the fourth gospel and arranges the salt, the oil, and the accessories on the table. The choir, accompanied by the organ, sings the Valentinian psalm, Dixit Dominus Domine mie, sede a dexteris meas. The consecrators then return, and the bishop-elect kneels before the patriarch, who delivers the oration, Domine Domina, Dea Deus, benedicere digneris, huac electo episcopo, name, et Gregri qua e cometitur per Hellenum Dominum nostrum. Amen. The first assistant bishop recites the Lord's Prayer in Greek. The second reads the Gnostic Gospel. The three consecrators approach the bishop-elect and in turn impose their hands upon him, saying, Electe Episcope, name, ego, octura te ionum, te sacro, te consacro, te creo, et te confirmo, episcopum, name of the episcopal seat. They embrace him, then appoint him with consecrated oil in the form of a tau on the forehead, saying, Pleroma te sanctificit, pleroma te sanctificit, pleroma te sanctificit, on the lips, saying, Pleroma te amplificit, and on the heart saying, Pleroma te magnificit. They drop a few grains of salt on his tongue, saying, Vos estes saltere, quod si sal evan urit in quo salitor. They place a candle in his right hand, saying, Vos estes lumen mundi. They present him with a cup full of water, and say, Vos estes fons aquae salentis in vitum aeternam. After this, the consecrator returns to their seats, and the bishop-elect comes to kneel before them. He places his hands in theirs to take the oath. I swear between the hands of your grace and your lordships, by the dread name of the most holy Pleroma, to faithfully fulfill my charge as Bishop of for which may Sophia and all the aeons be with me in aid. All present respond, Sic. Amen. The patriarch then blesses and bestows upon the newly consecrated bishop his episcopal insignia, the tau, suspended from a violet ribbon, the violet gloves, the infula, and the episcopal ring. Finally, he delivers the homily, gives the patriarchal benediction, and presents the new bishop to the parfaits and to the parfaits, declaring, I proclaim N, Bishop of N. The assembly responds, Fiat, Fiat. All the faithful kneel to receive the benediction of the new bishop, and afterward they each come forward to kiss his ring. References: Brightman, F.E., Liturgies, Eastern and Western, Oxford at the Clarendon Press, 1896, Les Forestiers, René, Le Occultisme in France, au 19th et 20th siècles, Les Églises Gnostiques, Ouvrage, inédit, publié par Antoine Favre, Arche, Milano, 1990, Gay Raoud, Pierre, Sex and Rights, Petite Iglesias, Régions Nouvelles, Sociétés Secrètes de Paris, Editions Emile Paul Freres, 1954. End of Chapter 2, end of Part 1.